Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton,
I'm Bob Scarborough.
and we are
Uh,
the FAIRtax Guys.
yes, indeed. Strum it like a stand-up bass.
There we go. Yeah, my brother Andy can play one of those things.
My goodness, yes. What a talented individual.
And Andy can play anything with strings. It's amazing.
In
But
fact, I've learned that he's by ear. He's just naturally
yeah,
tuned in.
he just picked it up and started playing. I mean, that's our mom was kind of musically inclined, and she got us guitars, and I could whack a few chords on mine, and Andy could pick like Chet Atkins. It's just amazing. But how do you like my new background? I don't think I've ever been to San Francisco before.
Uh,
Alcatraz is over there somewhere. I wonder if that's it over there, right up there in the corner. Can you see right there in the edge? I don't know if that's Alcatraz Island or not, but oh
might
well.
be for purposes of our discussion anyway. And somebody can let us know if that is indeed Alcatraz or not.
Oh well, yes, this is the Golden Gate Bridge. For those of you that are listening to one of the audio only podcasts, we have different virtual backgrounds every week, and I try to swap them around to get a little bit of a different visual effect. So, all right, let's get rocking into FAIRtax Power Radio again for this week, and as we always do, ha ha ha, time to see what the Congress critters are trying to do to the tax code. And again, same as last week, there's not anything really earth-shattering here that's going to end up in the Hall of Shame. But again, it's just more and more and more and more fiddling with the Internal Revenue Code, the bowl of spaghetti we talked about last week that needs to be dumped in the trash can and replaced with a barbecue sandwich.
Yeah.
We,
I
we will.
would vote for that. Yeah.
Yes, let's start off today with H.R. 8382 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to exclude certain combat zone compensation of certain service members relating to remotely piloted aircraft from gross income. If you fly a drone for the Air Force, then they're saying they're going to try to exempt that pay from your gross income.
Oh man. Can you believe it? Just about anything, little things like this, and then sometimes big pieces of tax code get oriented to a particular thought or industry, and makes it makes it that much more complicated.
Well, that's just it. There are thousands upon thousands of these little kinds of provisions that target very narrow audiences. Now, I can imagine, I don't know, expressed as a percentage of the entire population, what percentage of the entire population are service members remotely piloting aircraft? So, but if that little minuscule slice of the population gets a tax break here by saying, all right, we're going to exempt your pay for that from your gross income, and you don't have to pay taxes on it. That I wonder what lobbyist is behind that one. We talked about lobbying last week.
Yeah, it just there's so many of them. There's multiple companies and multiple lobbyists within those multiple companies.
Yeah, but this is Stephen Horsford of Nevada wants to exclude certain combat zone compensation. I guess if you're flying a drone over Iraq or someplace like that, then certain.
Piloting that drone.
Oh well, I ain't gonna mess with that. I've got a little drone that I fly to take pictures of trains with every now and then, but I think I ought to get that exempted from my income as well. Okay, let's go on. S4326. This is something that we've talked about here on FAIRtax Power Radio not long ago. A bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to modify the penalties relating to the disclosure of tax return information relating to contributors to certain tax-exempt organizations and for other purposes. It's supposed to be a federal felony to disclose tax return information without the taxpayer's authorization. We know that doesn't stop it from happening.
Uh,
Oh, mercy.
And at it, they're looking at it, like I'm going to wink and say, "Oh, well, we're not doing that because it says we can't." But here's some information for you that I'll leave it on my desk and turn around, and you can take a look.
Yeah, but this is to amend the Internal Revenue Code to modify the penalties Now, it doesn't say whether it's to make it stiffer or to make them more lenient, just to modify the penalties relating to the disclosure of tax return information relating to the contributors of certain tax-exempt organizations. And I got an idea. Why don't we get rid of tax-exempt organizations by getting rid of the tax from which they are exempt, and just everyone pays their federal taxes when they buy things at the cash register?
Makes sense to me. I'm all for it.
Sounds Oh, mercy. All right, try this one. H.R. 8355 to amend the Internal Revenue Code to recognize Indian tribal governments for the purpose of determining under the adoption credit whether a child has special needs. Now, how can you have a tax code that doesn't figure out whether a child has special needs or not?
Well, depending on whether they're in some sort of tribal situation, or if they're just a U.S. citizen, we're all U.S. citizens. So what's the problem with the tribal zones needing that particular designation?
I don't know. Recognize Indian tribal governments for the purposes of determining under the adoption credit whether a child has special needs. And there's another one that's similar, H.R. 8318, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to treat Indian tribal governments in the same manner as state governments for certain federal tax purposes and for other purposes. Now, how's that for being vague?
Yeah, just as vague as you can get it, because, well, quite frankly, it's there's no rush for detail. It's all just the headline, and then the congressman, representative that's sponsoring it, gets to tell whoever he's sponsoring it for that I've got this written up, and we're moving forward. And
All right, I got one more. H.R. 8292, the Taxpayer Data Protection Act, to amend the Internal Revenue Code to increase penalties for unauthorized disclosure of taxpayer information. Now, we talked about this with Steve Hayes a while back here. The folks there in Washington, the Washington elites, want the guy that leaked Donald Trump's tax returns and Elon Musk's tax returns, that guy that stole a lot of tax returns from very wealthy taxpayers and leaked that. And there are people up there that want him pardoned, even though he had committed a federal felony. They said, "Oh, well, actually, the intention was good." Even though he broke the law, we want him pardoned. So now this response is we want to increase the penalties for unauthorized disclosure of taxpayer information. Specifically, they want to change it from a $5,000 or 5 years in prison and change that to $250,000 and 10 years in prison. That's right. If H.R. 8292 becomes law.
I love it. Got to love it. It's just it's absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. H.R. 25, the FAIRtax Act, zeroes out all of that falderall, if you will, about monkeying with the tax code. And we get to pay our taxes at the cash register. Not only us, but drug dealers, prostitutes, people that pay in cash for everything, international travelers, all become contributors to the federal tax through the FAIRtax at the cash register. No longer are we putting papers in shoe boxes and trying to justify why we need all of the money that we paid to the government over the year back from withholding.
Oh, imagine. Well, evasion is really not the topic of today's FAIRtax Power Radio program, but that is a good point. I mean, the federal tax is evaded to the tune of over $1 trillion a year. That's what the IRS at least admits to. And now people who are not filing tax returns become taxpayers when they buy things. And if you're not here in the country legally, you pay the fair tax, you pay the full 23%. Some people are recoiling in horror at a 23%, and they'll actually call it a 30% sales tax. And so if you're not here legally and you don't qualify for the prebate, that's how much of your spending is going to be taxed, every bit of it. So that sounds like a cool idea as well.
Looking forward to the day. Looking forward to the day.
Indeed. All right. What we want to get into this week on FAIRtax Power Radio, we have often referred to, in fact, we've had John Linder on the program twice that I can remember, that he was the author. He and Neal Boortz together authored this book, it came out, what, in 2005, I believe,
Yes,
the
sir.
FAIRtax book, saying goodbye to the Internal Revenue Service and the income tax. And we have never, to my knowledge, just kind of dug into this book here on FAIRtax Power Radio. It's a fairly small book, but there is a wealth of information in here.
Yeah.
And I want to start off with something that is just I found astounding. This is a quote, and it's fairly lengthy. I'm going to read the whole thing here, and then I'll get you to comment on this. This says Congress went beyond merely enacting an income tax law. It repealed Article 4, actually, that would be the Fourth Amendment, Article 4 of the Bill of Rights, by empowering the tax collector to do the very things from which that article says we were to be secured. It opens up our homes, our papers, our effects to the prying eyes of government agents and sets the stage for searches of our books and vaults and for inquiries into our private affairs whenever the taxmen might decide, even though there might not be any justification beyond mere cynical suspicion. The income tax is bad because it has robbed you and me of the guarantee of privacy and the respect for our property that were given to us in Article 4 of the Fourth Amendment of the Bill of Rights. This invasion is absolute and complete as far as the amount of tax that can be assessed is concerned. Please remember that under the 16th Amendment, Congress can take 100% of our income anytime it wants to. And as a matter of fact, right now, it is imposing a tax as high as 91%. Now, this is downright confiscation and cannot be defended on any other grounds. The income tax is bad because it was conceived in class hatred, is an instrument of vengeance, and plays right into the hands of the communists. It employs the vicious communist principle of taking from each according to his accumulation of the fruits of his labor, and giving to others according to their needs, regardless of whether those needs are the result of indolence or lack of pride, self-respect, personal dignity, or other attributes of men. The income tax is fulfilling the Marxist prophecy. The surest way to destroy a capitalist society is by steeply graduated taxes on income and heavy levies upon the estates of people when they die. As matters now stand, if our children make the most of their capabilities and training, they will have to give most of it to the tax collector and so become slaves of the government. People cannot pull themselves up by the bootstraps anymore because the tax collector gets the boots and the straps as well. The income tax is bad because it's oppressive to all and discriminates particularly against those people who prove themselves the most adept at keeping the wheels of business turning and creating maximum employment and a high standard of living for their fellow man. I believe that a better way to raise revenue not only can be found, but must be found, because I am convinced that the present system is leading us right back to the very tyranny for which those who establish this land of freedom risk their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor to forever free themselves. Now, guess who said that? As a matter of fact, I'll let you, I know you know who said that.
I'm reading right along with you, pal. This was written and is part of the introduction to the FAIRtax book, written in between 1953 and 1955. This man was the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, T. Coleman Andrews.
The IRS commissioner telling the country that the income tax is bad for all of these different, I mean, that's like the CEO of Delta Airlines telling you don't get on a Boeing jet, you know? It's just crazy when the guy that is responsible for enforcing the law is on his soapbox telling you what an incredibly horribly bad law it is. We probably ought to pay attention to it.
Yeah, and we're talking 50, so we're talking 80 years ago, give or take, 75 years ago that
Well, let's see, that was 1953. I was born in 51, so this has happened when I was 2 years old. I will be turning 70, let's see, I'm 73, so that was 71 years ago.
Okay, so there you go. And this was at a time during the Cold War. It's no surprise that T. Coleman Andrews or anybody that was totally against communism would recognize that America should find a better way to raise revenue.
Yeah, it's crazy. Of course, he didn't see back there in 1953 to 1955 just the overwhelming complexity that the income tax is morphed into. I mean, it would be interesting to go back. Sherman set the Wayback Machine for 1953, and let me look at the tax code in effect at that time. And the IRS commissioner is telling you then that that this is a bad system. He was doing it kind of on philosophically opposed to communism is where a lot of this was coming from. But he was saying that the point he made was that this thing, the income tax, violates the Fourth Amendment. The tax man is allowed to do all of these things that this amendment is supposed to be protecting us from. We're supposed to be secure in our homes, secure in our papers, secure in stuff like that. And the tax man just has unbridled rights, and he doesn't really have to prove that you've done anything. It's just a suspicion. Well, I think you might owe some taxes. Let me see if I can dig into your bank account, stuff like that. That system is philosophically wrong. And that is the system that we fair tax advocates are trying to replace with a simple retail consumption tax that you can't evade, that does not play favorites, does not pick winners and losers, and still funds the government at the same level. And why people aren't just demanding the fair tax? Once you understand it, you'll demand it. So apparently, not enough people understand the fair tax yet, which is why we're out here every week on FAIRtax Power Radio. Now, I'm not sure where that came from.
And we encourage our volunteers. We encourage people who join us every week to begin those dialogues and reinforce, reinvigorate with your next door neighbors, with people, and have these conversations, these really meaningful conversations. Because if you look at where we are, what, $34 trillion in debt?
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to be reconciled and eliminated at some point? We're not in the business at the FAIRtax of trying to figure out how to spend the money in Washington, D.C. We're all about the method of taxation at the federal level, moving from an income tax to a tax on consumption. And in my conversations with people, it's almost like, wait a minute, that's a Republican thing, or some libertarian idea or whatever. It's not about liberals or conservatives. It's not about rich versus poor. It's not about black versus white, citizens versus illegal immigrants. We have to figure out a way to revitalize our economy. We're sitting on the prefaces of bankruptcy, and we know that with the Federal Reserve, it'll just churn out more money and flood the economy and solve issues that way. But we're spending way too much money. Again, not something that the FAIRtax is necessarily on the block for. We advocate a change in the method of taxation. So when you're out there, when our listeners and viewers are out there making the conversation, remind people that this is something that affects all of us, and the sustained level of inflation that we're dealing with, all caused by a monetary policy that is not sound, that has basically put pressure on the manufacture and delivery and sale of goods and services. We need to begin to have honest conversations across the political spectrum that brings us to a communal understanding of the benefit of a tax on consumption, specifically H.R. 25, the FAIRtax Act, versus the income tax. And this is exactly what the FAIRtax book is about. It is simple in its methodology and the discovery as the pages turn in the book. If you don't have a copy, you should get one and read it. If you'd like to borrow one, you should find somebody with a copy.
This came out in 2005.
Yeah.
So see, it's almost 20 years old here, but it is still just fantastic. And we're going to be going through different parts of the FAIRtax book. There's the cover of it. You can still get it. I think you can still get it from Amazon. You can probably find used copies on eBay. They're still out there. But chapter 1 is the history of the income tax. And let me get a read from part of the book here. The first attempt at an income tax came about to raise funds for what we know as the Civil War. In 1861, Congress passed a bill assessing a 3% income tax on everyone earning between $600 and $10,000 a year. Now, translating $600 a year in 1861 would be about $10,000 today.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you earned more than $10,000 back then, which would be $166,700 today, that rate went up to 5%, and a nice little inheritance tax was added to the mix, as were some additional sales and excise taxes as well. And it said the Union was not alone in enacting an income tax. The idea caught on south of the Mason-Dixon line as well. The Confederate states enacted their own version. Misery loves company. Boortz and Linder wrote on that thing. But in 1872, the populace was starting to show its displeasure with the income tax. The political class eliminated it, but the idea just plain would not die. There was a bill. Let's skip ahead here. The second term of Grover Cleveland brought us the economic fiasco that's gone down in history as the Panic of 1893. The Reading Railroad went into receivership. Banks and other businesses dependent on the railroad followed, had a general economic downturn. And then they were saying, well, we need a new income tax. In 1894, politicians then, as now, were not particularly eager to showcase just what they were trying to accomplish. So they made a blatant attempt to quell any possibility of a strong anti-income tax response by calling it, this practice still continues today. The name of the bill has absolutely no bearing on what is actually in it. They call this an act to reduce taxation and provide revenue for the government and, your favorite phrase, for other purposes. So how much can you trust a politician who passes a law to tax your income and then calls it an act to reduce taxation?
Oh. Inflation Reduction Act.
Oh, that's crazy. And of course, this skipping ahead here, the Supreme Court declared that unconstitutional. They said that you can't do that. As it turned out, the 2% tax on incomes over 4,000 started a chain of events that culminated in a constitutional amendment in our current income tax system. So Grover Cleveland, President Cleveland, thought the 2% income tax was unconstitutional, so he let it become law without his signature. The question of constitutionality was presented to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the income tax lost. The Supreme's ruled that the income tax was a direct tax on the citizens of the United States, a violation of the Constitution, which is why they had to have the 16th Amendment come in order to give the federal government the constitutional authority to tax our incomes directly. Excuse me. This is just fascinating. The FAIRtax book. As I say, we're going to be going through it here for the next several episodes of FAIRtax Power Radio. And what are you seeing there? I see you're reading something off your computer screen, it looks like.
I'm just verifying that that the book is available. I've gone to several of the locations, and the book is available on Amazon for sure. And you may be able to get it as in paperback or on Kindle, and there are other versions of it available. But you can get it for under $10 now. A very minimal amount to invest in. Not only the understanding of the fair tax, but how our country got to where we are in this considerable tax burden situation.
Let me read one more paragraph out of here. This says that those who favored the idea of an income tax met with considerable success, capturing public sentiment with promises that the tax would soak the rich, leave the vast majority of Americans alone. Economic class warfare was alive and well in the early 1900s as it is today.
It's crazy. How do you get away from that? How and what we talked about last week with the lobbyists, and how the financing of reelection campaigns gets into the mix of the day-to-day operation up there. How do we go about bringing the country into understanding. And I think it goes back to it's not a partisan issue. And I think a lot of folks throw smoke and mirrors up that will allow us in this politically charged environment that we're currently living in, that people can't talk to each other as people. They have to be either a Republican or a Democrat or libertarian, or, you can't come to a focused conversation without there being some political ramifications involved to talk about. Hey, all we're talking about doing, matter of fact, if folks like social, issues paid for by the government, well, then you should be all for the fair tax, because it's going to bring more money into the Treasury than the current situation. And so then you can feel good about, helping people out that need help. And that's not our debate. Our debate is how the money gets collected.
Okay. Well, this book has 16 chapters in it, so I don't know how much longer or how many FAIRtax Power Radio programs we're going to be spending going through this book. It's going to be several of them, so we'll just keep going until we decide we've pretty well covered everything. But there it is again. I strongly urge that you get a copy of this thing. And actually, we may get our series interrupted a little bit. It's mid-May as we're recording this. And right into May, 1st of June is when Supreme Court decisions come down. Now, we have talked about here on FAIRtax Power Radio several times before about the Moore case, Moore versus United States. The constitutionality of taxing unrealized income is being decided by the Supreme Court. And when that decision comes down, whenever it'll be, we're going to get Steve Hayes back here on the program and have him explain it to us. So that one is maybe dropped into the middle of our Let's Go Through the FAIRtax book series here on FAIRtax Power Radio. That will be fun. So again, we urge you to be with us every same time, same station every week here on the FAIRtax official Facebook page, on the FAIRtax Guys YouTube channel, or if you're tied up at the time we're actually streaming this, 8 p.m. Eastern time on a Tuesday night. You can go back to the YouTube archives or the Rumble archives and check this all out. But for the next several episodes here on FAIRtax Power Radio, we're going to be going through the FAIRtax book and just explaining what Boortz and Linder had to say about it, and trying to convince as many people as we can that we need to, let's use our new metaphor here, dump the spaghetti bowl into the trash can, get rid of the entire income tax system, and replace it with a fair tax. And I said, this is going to be a fun journey through a very fascinating book. But afraid that is all the time we have for this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Again, thank you so much for watching, listening, and sharing the video. See you back here next week, same time, same channel. Until then, I'm Bob Paxton.
And I'm Bob Scarborough.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. And once you understand it,
you will demand it.
So, how much will I bring home?
Go ahead.
How much do you make? We'll just say 40,000. Okay, keep it simple, throw out the deductions, all that stuff. So, you got your 40K, right? Now the first 8,000 is going to be taxed at 10%. The 8 to 33,000 is going to be taxed at 15%. And the 33 to 40, of course, is 25%. So that brings your total to $6,345.
Okay, so the average is what?
16%. Okay, and then on top of that, you got Medicare, which is 1.5%, and then of course your Social Security, which is 6.2%. So actually, your new total is $9,405.
Which is
23.65%. You're getting it. You're getting it. Don't even get me started on what the boss has to pay. He's got to pay a portion of your taxes as well, so you don't have to.
Right. And you?
Oh, you'd bring home every penny.